There's been an Invincible movie in the works since 2003, but most fans think it's an unnecessary project. If the comic is awesome and the show is the best adaptation possible, why even make a movie? It'd be super expensive, and adapting the story would be tough, since they'd have to cram in everything. Wouldn't it be better to use that money on a AAA video game, or bump up the show's budget? But even though most of the fandom's against it, this could actually work, and it makes sense they want to do it. Today, I'm going to break down 4 ways a live-action movie could make everyone happy. And to keep everything perfectly balanced, I'll also go over all the concerns people have about the project. The first option is doing a live-action prequel to the animated show. Since Rex got so popular after his sacrifice in the Invincible War, they could adapt Adam, Eve, and Rex Splode. That's a 3-issue miniseries that shows us Eve and Rex's adventures before they ever met Mark. We get to see how Rex was treated like trash by his family, how they sold him to the government, and how he got turned into a weapon. That alone is enough for a whole movie. Plus, we see his first meeting with Eve, and how they became a couple. Cecil also shows up, and we get their first fight against the Lizard League. Fans would love all the references to the show. It wouldn't even be that expensive to make, since it wouldn't need a ton of VFX, and it'd help us understand Eve and Rex better. The comic and show never fully explain why Eve even liked Rex, or why she let him treat her the way he did, but this adaptation could dive deeper into their relationship. The show just briefly mentioned Rex's origin here and there across the first 3 seasons, but we never actually got a flashback to his childhood or his early days as a government agent. So this wouldn't be a rehash or a live-action remake. It'd be a compliment to the show.
I would like to see that.
And if you're not into Rex's backstory, they could focus on Nolan before he came to Earth, maybe adapt the parts from his books we saw in Season 2. We'd see him working as an agent for the Viltrum Empire, traveling to different planets, wiping out threats to Viltrum. They'd give Space Racer more screen time and show his first meeting with Nolan. This was only got hinted at in the show. And I'd totally pay a ticket to see Nolan take on the Ragnar again, but this time in live action. That would get us hyped for a big fight later on. I won't spoil that if you haven't read the comic. Sure, a movie like that would definitely cost more than one about Eve and Rex, mostly because of all the visual effects. But Omni-Man is one of the most popular characters in the franchise, so fans would totally show up for this live action. Plus, Kirkman isn't against telling a new story in the live action format. At San Diego Comic-Con 2024, Robert said this: "In relation to the show, the movie has to provide a different experience. It has to still be true to Invincible in some interesting ways, but it has to be its own thing. It has to stand on its own. But there's a major issue with making a prequel. Fans would love it. But if the movie gets the marketing it deserves, it's going to reach people who haven't seen the show or read the comic. And that audience isn't going to care about a prequel about characters they've never even met. It'd be a huge risk to aim only at die-hard Invincible fans, because your aunt isn't going to know who Rex or Nolan are. And I doubt Universal would drop $200 million on a Nolan prequel if they're not sure they'll make their money back. Since the Adam Eve special didn't make much of a splash on Prime Video, I'm guessing there's not much interest in more prequels or spin-offs without Invincible himself.
All they care about is money.
But don't worry, there are more and better options. The second way this live-action movie could work is by doing an in-between, a movie that takes place between seasons of the show. It's what a lot of anime do, like Chainsaw Man. In 2022, Season 1 dropped, and before Season 2, Studio Mappa's adapting the Reese arc as a movie. This is not filler, it's a bridge between seasons. Invincible could totally do the same. They could adapt Invincible versus The Astonishing Wolfman, a 2-part crossover. It follows Mark as he encounters a werewolf being hunted by Cecil and the Guardians of the Globe, accused of killing his wife. But turns out, Wolfman was framed, and Invincible helps him clear his name. Along the way, they fight Cecil, Immortal, and some new zombies made by D.A. Sinclair. I doubt they'll include this story in the show, since they already skipped it in Season 3. And we do know Kirkman owns the rights to Wolfman, because we saw him during the Invincible War. But for this to work, the movie should come out next year, and we know that's not happening. The live action is still stuck in pre-production.
That's a shame.
A better option would be adapting the reboot arc as an in-between story. No spoilers here, but in issues 124 to 126, Mark meets a super powerful being who sends him back in time to the first issue of the comic. Mark gets to relive the whole story from the beginning, but he still remembers his adult life, so he starts changing things to try and make them better. It's a sort of a parody of how Marvel and DC constantly reboot stories to bring in new readers. But in Invincible, it's not just filler or clickbait. This arc actually plays a huge role in what's coming next. They could drop this movie between seasons 5 and 6 and make fans go to theaters to keep up with the story before the next season hits. Since this arc happens in a different timeline, doing it in live action instead of animation would make total sense. It really helps set it apart. There'd even be a cool meta message, because in issue 127, they changed artists. Cory Walker replaced Ryan Ottley, so the comic's art style shifted. Same idea here, swapping animation for live action. The only tiny little problem with this movie is that it would only make sense to fans of the show and the comic. The whole point is seeing familiar events through a new lens, so if you're new, you'll just be lost. It could still catch the interest of casual viewers who might go back and read the comic or watch the show, but someone who knows nothing about Invincible would be super confused. I think this is the most creative idea, and I'd love to see it. It'd be something really fresh, but I don't think Universal would risk making something where half the audience might not get what's going on. Most likely, they'll go with the third option, the most boring and obvious one. Just adapt the major arcs of the comic in live action. The first movie would cover Mark's early days as a superhero, Nolan's betrayal, and the big fight between Invincible and Omni-Man. A second movie would adapt the showdown with Angstrom Levy. A third live action film would cover the Invincible War and the battle with Conquest. The fourth installment would adapt the Viltrumite War, and they could keep going until they've adapted the whole comic, maybe 7 or 8 movies total. That'd be a huge project. Not many franchises pull off that many big budget films and survive, but Mission Impossible, Harry Potter, Fast and Furious, and the MCU did it. So there's no reason Invincible couldn't work long term in live action too. It could hook a whole new generation of fans, just like the comic and show did. And I know what you're thinking. You're convinced this would totally suck. Every time there's news about the live action, fans get super mad. All the AI-made trailers and fan art get hate. Nobody agrees on the cast. And recent live actions from Disney show that adapting beloved animated stuff doesn't always work. Same thing with the new Harry Potter show. Fans of the books and movies aren't fully sold on it yet. People say it feels unnecessary, and we might see that same kind of reaction with Invincible's live action too.
I'm not gonna watch it. I don't need to watch it.
Universal and Kirkman would have to trim the story a lot to fit it into movies. In the first one, Amber, Debbie, and William would probably get sidelined. The Mauler twins, Sinclair and Doc Seismic, might get cut completely to focus on the big characters. And Rex wouldn't get the amazing development he had in the show. Instead of expanding the comic and improving the source material like Prime Video did, they'd have to squeeze everything into a 2.5-hour film. But here's the thing, the movie wouldn't be replacing the comic or the show. It'd just be a new version of a great story with the original creator behind it. Originally, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg were set to write and direct. They're the guys behind Preacher and the Boys, so the project would be in good hands. If they actually pull off a solid adaptation of Invincible, everybody wins. We get more Invincible to enjoy in a fresh new format.
I'm not convinced.
I love the show and the comic's awesome, but live action brings something different. Characters can be way more expressive than in a comic panel or animated shot, and the fights could be even more brutal. One of the few complaints about the show is that the animation isn't on the same level as Across the Spider-Verse or Demon Slayer, which dulls the impact of some scenes. But if the live action had a budget of $150 million, which Universal can afford, then we'd see spectacular fights that surpass the ones we saw in the series. And if you still don't care about the live action, think about this. Invincible's already super popular, but it could go even bigger if the live action blows up like Deadpool and Wolverine. A bunch of casual viewers might start watching the show to find out what happens next. It's the same thing that happened when season 1 dropped. A lot of people didn't even know this franchise existed, but they became fans thanks to the show and ended up reading the comic to find out how the story continued. If that happens again, future seasons would get way more views. Prime Video wouldn't hesitate to renew the series, up to the 8 seasons Kirkman wants, because they'd be raking in cash thanks to the Universal movie. And let's not forget, Universal has a deal with Prime Video to put their new releases on the platform once they're out of theaters. So both studios have good reason to go all in on a live action movie. Everyone wins. But if you're still not convinced, because there's a good chance they could mess it all up, we've got a fourth option. And it's my favorite. Make a direct sequel to the comic and the show, expanding the original story. No spoilers here, but the ending is amazing, though not completely closed. The characters who survive still have tons of potential for new adventures that no writer has explored yet. Kirkman could come up with a brand new story featuring our favorite characters, showing us what happened after issue 144. There are a couple characters who didn't get much to do in the comic since they showed up late in the story, but it'd be cool to see them in live action. It could work like an epilogue, a tribute to the comic and the show, and fans would be thrilled. If people still want more after that, they could launch a whole live action franchise with brand new stories.
I'm a little turned on.
Depending on how they handle it, the movie could still attract a brand new audience. They wouldn't need to do a bunch of flashbacks to all 8 seasons of the show for the newcomers, but at the same time, you wouldn't have to know the full backstory to get into the new adventure. It'd be like the Star Wars prequels. They're packed with references to the original saga, but even if you never watched the first 3 movies, you can still understand the prequels. Same deal here. It'd be like what Disney's doing with The Mandalorian and Grogu, a theatrical movie to wrap up the TV series. If that does well, Kirkman and Universal could go for the same strategy with Invincible. The only downside is we'd have to wait a while. It wouldn't make any sense to release this movie before the show ends, because that would spoil everything for people who haven't read the comic. If Prime Video actually goes along with Kirkman's wet dream and gives Invincible 8 seasons, the show wouldn't wrap up until 2030, if we're lucky. So the live-action sequel would drop sometime next decade. But hey, that's not even that crazy when you think the movie's been stuck in development since 2003.
I've waited 14 years.
I know.
Guess I can wait a little longer.
It sounds like a long wait, but Kirkman even joked about it. He said the production's taking so long, Timothée Chalamet might end up playing Omni-Man. It was a joke, sure, but it suggests they're willing to wait at least 5 more years before they start working on the movie. If the show's wrapping up by then, they could crank up the hype with a live-action continuation announcement. The final season's ratings would skyrocket if Kirkman teased a movie follow-up, because even comic readers wouldn't know what's coming next. All I really hope is that the live-action gets a bigger budget than the show, so we're not stuck complaining about the visuals again. Sadly, the show's animation just can't compete with the top-tier stuff from Studio Mappa. We explain why in this video over here.
I'm not gonna watch it.